Hello there, it's Dave Motohead again. I'm out here working in the garage and got nothing to do but watch football and work on stuff, so I thought I'd just put on the hat cam and film what I'm doing for a little bit, just because I ain't got nothing better to do. So hold on a second. Let me put on the hat cam. Oh, the hat cam, the greatest invention since canned meat. Well, first thing I got to do is I got to take this thermostat out. And I always find these things where people shear these little pins off and stuff. But what you got to do is you just kind of can pull on this thing, and most of the time that pin will come out a little bit. You can get yourself a real thin little screwdriver. You can go in behind that thing and you can just tap and wedge, and most times you can reuse those pins. And once you get the thing stuck out there a little bit, you can push it like that and clamp onto it with some vice grips, some good pair of vice grips. Clamp on that little pin, and they got a little serrated edge. They're kind of twisty in there, so if you pull and twist like that, you can get that little pin right out of there. And you see how it's all a twisty pin? So now you can take your old head. I'm stealing all the stuff off the old striper head and put them on the new striper head. Let's grab our new striper head. Yeah, see, there's no choke coil in that one, so now we can just put that sucker up in there like that. Take my gloves off because it's a little one. And then we can take our little pin here that we saved. And I don't know why people always break those things off. I always find them busted off in there, and I like to have the pin in there because it holds the thing from falling out. Anyway, you can stick it in there like that and take yourself a little hammer and give a couple little taps, and then it twists itself in there. And there you go. Now you got your choke coil in there, and then when you put the bottom shroud on, those bolts hold that up in there. I always put that bottom shroud bolt in there when even when I'm running without the bottom shrouds. And so now I got my thermistor in the head. I've got my choke coil, and I changed my balance tube already, which I didn't film that, and I got my helicoil or my save a thread insert in there. And so now I'm ready to put that head on, I believe. So I'll go ahead and blow this off and clean it all up, and then I'll put the gaskets in there and put the head on. So I'll be right back with you. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is put our copper head gaskets in, and I like to block everything off so there's no way anything can get inside there. And I put the spark plugs in loosely just to block the hole. And on these copper head gaskets, there's a kind of a sharp edge side, and then there's a smooth round side. Well, I always like to put the smooth round side against the aluminum, and the flat sharp side against the steel cylinder. So I've taken my air gun and I've blown all this out, and it all looks pretty clean. So I will stick my little head gaskets down inside there with the flat side out, the smooth side towards the aluminum. I just feel it doesn't tear it up as much that way. And we will slide the head on, because that's just what I'm going to do. So put those suckers in there, and most times with these new head gaskets, they'll sit in there and they won't fall out. So we'll pick up our head, go over here, and I've prepared all the surfaces of the cylinders. And look at that. Just gonna make. Always check in there to make sure that our gaskets haven't fallen out, and they haven't. So we just move this around. And there we go. Got the head on there now. And something else that I've done is I chased all these threads to make sure they're all good. And I've got the correct flange nuts. You see, that's the flange nut. What this had on there before was it had a nut with a washer. And if you look at this washer, you'll see that, I don't know if you can see that, but it's concaved right there and it's bowed in. That's because when you put them on there and you tighten them up, they got that little hole around it and it presses the washer in there. That's why you always got to use the correct nut. And surprisingly enough, these head bolts were put on there at like 65 foot-pounds, and I'm totally surprised none of these pulled out. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of these top nuts on there, and then just to hold it on, and then after that I will put in the pushrod tubes. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I got the head on here, and these end ones kind of just finger tight, so hold it in place. And the next thing I'm going to do is put the pushrod tubes in. And I've already cleaned all this out of here and made sure it's good. And when I pulled this apart, I blew all the crap out of around these, and I always stick paper towels in there a little bit. And then when I go to do them, I could just spin this around in there and make sure there's no more crap in it. And you see there's a little bit in there. You can take your finger with this little thing and go up inside there. Just make sure the sealing surface is smooth and no dirt. And then you can check it with your finger. It seems nice and clean. And then you take your pushrod tube, and I always blow them out one more time. And got the Viton O-ring on this side and no O-ring on that side. And they go in like this, small end first. And I stick them in there like that. And then grab yourself an O-ring. And I always check these things real carefully. Clean them off with my fingers, because you could usually feel if there's like a cut or a slice in them. I always check. And I'm going to reuse these. I got a whole bunch of used ones, and the Viton ones just stay pliable like that. They seem to work forever. I've never had one leak. And then I'll put my O-ring on there, and get me a little bit of grease here on my finger, and spin a little bit of grease around it. Get that O-ring greased up. Not too much, just a little bit. And get me a little grease going on this one, and it makes them slide in easier, and I think it helps them seal. And you don't need a whole lot of grease, just a little bit. And then you can take that sucker down in there, get it lined up, push it in the hole, and then I could push that one right in by hand. And then move on to the next one. But what also you want to do is you want to take a socket and set it in there, one that's about the right size, and go along and tap them all in before you're done. And that way it sets them in there so you know they're set in good. Oh, one other thing, this is one of the pushrod tubes I found on Striper. I don't know if you can see that or not, but it's completely flat. And when I worked on it last time, I didn't have this side of the motor apart because I had good compression and everything. But this was a running pushrod tube, and I don't know if you can see down that or not, but it is completely flattened and crooked, and that was just amazing to me that somebody would put that on. So I got a different pushrod tube. Anyway, I'll go ahead and put all the pushrod tubes in and get right back to you. Okay, got all my pushrod tubes in there. Stuck my socket in there and tapped them all in. They're all up in the block nice and good. or the engine case, as it were. And what I've done next is I've taken all my little Viton O-rings for the rocker studs, and I've greased those up, and I like to stick them in the hole first to make sure they're in place. And then I take a little teeny, just a little teeny squirt of WD-40 and put it on those threads there. So when I torque it, I got some lubrication, you know, to lube up the threads of the rocker bolt stud. And you see here, I take a little box when I take these things apart, and I poke holes in them, and I keep everything in its own place. I like to do that because I just like to, you know, put it back where it came from. And so I'm going to start with these, and what I've noticed on this one, I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's kind of got a little gash right there for some reason. So that's, you know, when I go to put the rocker on there, I'm going to check that out. It looks like it's a little bit of wear right there. So I'm not going to use this one because I don't like using stuff that's got a little gash in it or any kind of a, you know, wear. So I found me another one in my immense pile of garbage. So, but what I like to do is take these things and clean them up just a little bit on this side, make sure that they're nice and flat. And yeah, it looks like it's good. And I like to hold it on there like that, and then stick my rocker stud in there. And the reason I lube those up is I want to make sure that it's not pinching. You can see it's going in there like that, and it'll, when you lube up those O-rings, it kind of helps them where they don't get caught, and you can screw your thing in there. And then I put them in there first, so when you hold that flat like that with your finger, the O-ring can't come out. And then I take my special little tool here, and I can just finger tight them up in there like that. See, this is the greatest little wrench. Love this wrench. Finger tight, and I take the next one and clean it up a little bit. And it's okay if it's got a little lube on it. Inspect it, and that one looks like it's in good shape. And stick it up in there, and you can kind of feel when it goes in the hole there, and give it a couple spins, finger tight. Now this one will hold it on there, and I can go like this, or you can go like this if you want. Whee! That's why I love this little wrench. You just kind of get them snugged up, and then, so I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these now and get those rocker studs on there. So I'll be right back. Okay, got all my rocker studs on there now, and they're just snugged up. And so now I'm going to torque the head. And what I've done here is I've backed all my head nuts off, and I just gave them a little teeny squirt, just enough to wet the threads, a little bit of WD-40 to torque them down wet. And it seems, doing some reading, that torquing things wet is the right way to do it. And I talked to some people at Corvair and other places, and so I'm going to torque these things down. At first I'm going to run these up snug, I think. So I'll run all my head nuts up snug. And then I got my little book out to follow my torque sequence, because I don't seem to remember it. But I mean, it's pretty much, you cross it and cross it and cross it. And what I need is I need one of those little special sockets to do this. Okay, so we're snug. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go 10 foot-pounds on everything first. And I got my little book here, and just for the thing, and I'm going to go 10 foot-pounds first. There's 10. And then I think you go down to this one. And then over to this one. You kind of just go back and forth and then back and forth and kind of like that. So I'm going to go ahead and torque the head. I'm going to go like at 10 foot-pounds, and then 15 foot-pounds, and 20 foot-pounds, and 25, and then probably end up around 30, 33 foot-pounds on torquing this head. And I don't want to really go more than that because the other side had a bunch of pulled studs, and I don't want to have any of these pull out, so hopefully they'll hold. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and torque the head now. Alright, I got my head all torqued on there. Got all the bolts torqued in sequence and double checked them and triple checked them because I'm anal that way. And none of my head studs pulled out, so I believe torque is good on the heads. Next thing I'm going to do is inspect all the push rods and put just a little teeny bit of grease on the end of them and stick them all in there. And I already inspected all the rocker arms, and what I found was I found two of them that I don't like. So this one here, I don't know if you can see it or not, but there is a crack right there. And I always inspect all these things. I inspect the balls for galling and everything, but on this particular push rod, or rocker arm, I don't know if you can see it or not. Maybe you can, but there's a crack right there. And this is the only one I found with a crack in it. I could feel it with my fingernail, and I know it's a crack. It kind of comes through on this side too. So that is a potential failure. Might run forever like that. Most likely it won't. Most of the time you find cracks coming off here somewhere or around this area. But this one's got a crack right there, so I'm not going to use that one. And then this one here, what I found that I don't like is the valve contact area. You can see where it's black right there. That part isn't contacting the valve. It's got baked on oil on it. So I always inspect this area, inspect in here, look for cracks anywhere I can, check for galling inside there. And ones I don't like, I toss them and I get a different one. Also, these balls, I don't know if you can see this or not, but this is the one that had the crack in it, and you can catch it with your fingernail like that. You can see it's all black right in there, and so I've got some new ones here. You can see the difference possibly. This one's, once that hardened area goes, it starts pitting in there and gets rough and has potential for failure. So I always inspect these things and put good rocker balls in there. So that one I'm not going to use, and this one here has got some galling on it. I don't know if you could tell. So I looked in my stash pile and I found two rockers to replace those, and two rocker balls. So two of these rockers aren't going back in along with one of these studs because I don't want to do this stuff twice. But then again, one of the other ones might break. These are 50-year-old parts, and you never know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all the push rods in there, and then I'll put the rockers on. That'll be next. Okay, so what I've done is I've went ahead and inspected all my push rods, cleaned out the insides. I inspect all the ends for any little chipping. You see little chips around the hole there, and they're starting to gall and they're bad. So I've also taken them and you roll them on a piece of glass, and you can see if they're bent. Usually, if you have good ones, they're nice and straight. So I check all that stuff, and then what I do with these is I put just a little teeny bit of grease on the ends of them, and you want to make sure you got your little hole there, point on the outside, to the outside. The one with no hole, side hole goes in. But when you stick these things in there, you got to make sure you get them set in the lifter. And if you look, see it stops right there. But if you move it just a little bit, it goes in. You see that? And what I find is I can feel it in there. Right there, it's there. So if you tighten down the rocker on that, it's not going to be in the dimple. But you got to feel it, and if you look real close, you'll see I'll lift up and then it goes in farther. And with the grease on the end of it, you don't need not much, just a light coating. It keeps the push rod in the dimple, and then I already greased this up, and so now, and I grease up the valves a little bit, and a little bit of grease there, and then you can just take this dude and put it on there, and I make sure they're all in the right spot, that they're all seated in the dimple of the lifter, and then get this nut started. And then I just run it down until there's about a thread and a half or so. Showing. And you pull on it once it gets tight, and you can feel it tighten up. Okay, that's about good. Now if you see, they've all got about a thread and a half or so showing. And what I'll do now is I'll position my crank in the right spot to where I can come through here and do a cold adjustment on these, and I'll get the crank in the right spot, and we'll do that right now, and I'll show you how I adjust those for a cold adjustment. Now what I'm going to do here is put my wrench on there, and I got number 1 spark plug out, and I'm just going to stick my thumb or my finger over it. Usually my finger fits in there, and I'm going to crank this thing over, and when I feel air pushing out, then I know I'm compression stroke for number 1. You can kind of watch the valves there. Come on, baby. Okay, that looks like we've got some exhaust valve. Now the air's pushing out. If you can listen, you hear the air? Now I'm on compression. I don't know if you can hear the air or not. So now I know if I go backwards, I know I'm on the compression stroke. I can feel the air pushing on my finger. And I'll bring it up to, hear that? Bring it up to top dead center. 0 right there, which I kind of marked it. And now, according to my book, I can adjust half the valves. It says what? Number 1 intake, number 1 exhaust, number 3 intake, number 5 exhaust, number 4 exhaust, number 6 intake. So now I can go through there and adjust all those, and I'll do that next. Okay, we've got our engine on number 1, top dead center, compression stroke, and according to my little book, we can, on this side, we can adjust the number 6 intake. You can tell it's the intake because you can follow this down right to the valve, and the number 4 exhaust. So what I'm going to do is, since my nuts are down about that close, there's always the spin the finger method and all that, but what I do with valves, I adjust them twice, basically. I get them close, cold, and then after I always put my open valve covers on there, and when I get it running, I get it warmed up, and then I go back through and adjust them all hot, because I just think that doing the hot adjustment is a way to get them all perfectly even. But what you can do is, you see it's a little bit loose. I got my smallest, it's 15 thousandths feeler gauge, and I stick it in there, and you see it goes through there no problem. So then I know I'll turn this until I start to get some tension on it right there. Now it takes me a little bit of tension. I can't push it back in, so I know that I'm just at 0 lash right there. And so then what I'll do is I'm at 0 lash, and I'll go about a half turn. And then that's good enough to get me started. And then I'll come over to number 4 and see where number 4 is at. And it looks like it's almost ready. I'll back it off till it's loose. There we go, it's loose. And then I'll tighten it up until I get just a little bit of pressure on that thing. Just where I have to start tugging on it to get it out. Right about there. Then I'll just go a half turn. So I know I'm pretty good there. So I'll move my engine over, and then I can come and adjust the rest of them. Okay, now I've got all my valves cold adjusted. Pretty close, I guess. Next thing I'm going to do is put this oil cooler back on, and make sure you put your little shroud on there first, your little tin piece, or else you'll never get the get it in there after the oil cooler's on. And it's got a little bolt up in there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just lightly coat. I've cleaned all this stuff up, and I'm just going to put a little teeny bit of gasket cinch on these. And I always keep a fresh can of gasket cinch around, and you don't really need much, just a little teeny light coating, just enough to get a seal on there. I use stuff sparingly. I don't like to coat stuff like crazy. And put your new Viton little gasket in there, or your O-ring or rubber tube thingy, whatever you want to call it. And I've already went over this once in a different thread, and I don't like to put too much, just enough to lightly coat it, and stick it in there first, and then scrape a bunch of the stuff off. You don't want a lot of gooey stuff. Get to where there's just a little teeny bit, and then I go around it just a little, just barely touch it, just enough to put a thin film on there. You don't want to use too much, because then it gets all inside everything. And then we're going to put our oil cooler on that I've already cleaned up, and I'm going to get that bolt started in the hole, and I can kind of look down there and make sure it's in the right spot there, and tighten that bolt up. And then I'm going to torque that. I like torquing them about 12 foot-pounds, or you can do it in inch-pounds or whatever you want to do. What I always do is I get this lined up right there to where I can see it, and I know that that bolt's going to fit into place, and then I know that it's going to line up, because that hole right there is lined up. Sometimes I stick the bolt in there, but you just get it on there, and there you go. 12 foot-pounds. That's all you need. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some oil in this engine and hook the starter up, and I'm going to do a compression test and see what we got. Okay, we've got some oil in the crankcase, both heads on. Got me the test battery, got ground going up to the head, positive going up to the starter. Got my little test button here going over to the positive terminal. I'm going to pull all my little bug protectors out. I call them bug protectors because the bugs crawl in everywhere, and I just seal everything up so the bugs don't get in my stuff. And I've got my trusty snap-on compression checker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook up our little button to start, and we're going to check our compression. Let's see what happens here. I'd say we have about 150 psi in that cylinder. Maybe a little bit more. About 160. So that's good. Now we will move on to the next cylinder and see what we got there. Actually, you want to pull that off. And we'll just... So that's good. So far, so good. Really don't need to seal that up too much. And we'll hit number 4 there. About 155, 160 or so. So that's good for that one. And after it starts running and stuff, it might come back up a little bit after I do a running adjustment, but that's still pretty good, I would say. And let's check this third one, or actually number 2, but get my guy down in there. There we go. I know you're supposed to do that with the wrench, but I get it pretty tight with just the. Let's check the next one. And we got about 100 a little spark there. So we got about 150 on that one. So I'd say that we're good on this side. So anyways, can't really beat that. Once I start it up, I'm thinking we'll be good. Let me swap the hats here. And so what I'll do now, since we seem to have good compression, equal compression all the way on that side, is I will button this engine back up. I've already checked this side. This side's good too. Whoops, about the same compression. And I'm going to kind of check the valve train geometry to make sure that it's, the rockers are hitting on the valve correctly. I think you want it to be about halfway, dead center of the valve stem. Anyway, I'll check that. And I'm going to go ahead and check that and button this thing up. And that's all for now, because it's time for me to eat dinner. So thanks for watching. I'll continue this later.